Welcome back to another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight-up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. Like any good Mafia movie, the Mafia games, currently under the stewardship of developer Hangar 13 and 2K, have seen a fair share of giddy highs and depressing lows. If Mafia 3 was the Godfather 3 of the series, the old country wants to be Godfather 2, or more specifically the parts set in Sicily, because that's essentially what the game is. Rather than advance the story forward to the 70s, the game takes us back to where it all started. Instead of big cities and organized crime, this Mafia is set in the idyllic hills of the old country where passions run hot and scores are settled in blood. It's a decidedly more scrappy version of the Mafia story in many ways, and it feels just as inspired by Red Dead Redemption as it does GTA. But is this prequel the last desperate gasps of a dying franchise, or does this game breathe new life into the series? That's the question I had going in. What were they going to do to shake this formula up? Not much, it turns out, which is at first a little disappointing, but in the end, I was actually very satisfied with what they did here. They're not reinventing the wheel on the series. Instead, they're focusing on what works about these games and doing it. Basically, they took all the things people liked about Mafia, the Definitive Edition, and just did more of that. And frankly, that was the best choice they could have possibly made. At this point, everyone watching this already knows what the old country is. To their credit, the developers in 2K have been pretty clear about how this new Mafia game is not an open world game, even if all the signs point to it being one. There is an open world map, and you spend time riding horses and driving around, but for everyone in the back row, they weren't exaggerating. This is not a true open world game. If you're going into it with that expectation, you're going to be disappointed. I went in knowing what to expect, and in certain ways, I ended up being a little disappointed, because the setting of the game is incredibly beautiful and would have been nice to get a chance to do something in the unique Mediterranean setting, but it's just not what the devs wanted to do. This is, much like Mafia 1 and 2, a linear game where you go through missions one after another. Now, as I said, this is a little disappointing, but also it's a little satisfying in a certain way as well. We'll get into that later. And you do get a breather from time to time. You get to free roam, wander the world, middle of the story, blah, blah, blah. All you can really do is find collectibles and visit the shop, though. Outside of the main story content, there's just not a lot going on. Now, the conflict here is, like I said, there is kind of something satisfying about there just being a straightforward, focused game that exists on an open world map, but there's got to be like a middle ground between tedious open world bloat and having basically nothing. Like, they could have gone the Spider-Man open world route with a few major side activities like racing or maybe some bandit camps to figure out a few side quests at the level of the main story, but shorter. Just extras like that. They really would have worked, in my opinion. But I do see why the developers decided to focus entirely on the story, because historically, that's what's worked best for the series. And the weakest game of the franchise, Mafia 3, the actual story bits are great. It's the open world parts that drag the game down. That's just not the case here, because there aren't really any open world bits. So what do you do in Mafia the Old Country? Well, there's knife fighting, gun shooting, lots of Rockstar brand drive and talks, lots of opportunities for sneaking around, and a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot of lovingly crafted cutscenes. For players looking for instant gratification, the opening hours of the Old Country, they're probably going to seem painfully slow. It's a full 3 hours before you get a gun in your hand and actually get to shoot somebody. It's not paced like a standard video game. It feels like a long movie or a prestige TV show. There are bombastic set pieces, but they are eventual in their arrival. But the story, I mean, it is strong. It is an intentionally old school story in which I would say if it were in lesser hands could come off as pretty cliche, but man, they make it work. You play as Enzo Favara, who is a miner in both senses of the word at the start of the game, both child and in indentured servitude in a mine. He eventually becomes a runaway, falls under the protection of a powerful Don in early Sicily. The world of the game is both recognizable but pretty alien in its mix of old world rot and new world innovation. Automobiles are a rare commodity, so you spend a good portion of the game riding around on horses. This gives the game an almost Wild West feel at times, except instead of bandit gangs and outlaws, it's mafia. You know, actually, there's bandits as well. It's mafiosos. There are bandits, though. It gives the game a unique flavor not seen in other Mafia games. Because the stakes are generally quite a bit lower, the focus is on the characters, with a big emphasis put on Enzo's romance with the Don's daughter, which again could have been very tedious and cliched as well, but it's well done here and told with a deft hand. The story, that's it in a nutshell. The twists and turns aren't going to surprise you, but at some point, people are going to understand there are essentially 7 story arcs that pretty much every story can be put into. The actual specifics of things, the beats, the points, the destination, it's not those things that make a story good. It is the journey. It is not what, it is how. And Mafia: The Old Country does how very well. The depth of the writing and the specific characters who sometimes are both likable and detestable at the same time give what's a fairly traditional crime story a lot of heart and meaning than what it would otherwise have, with people who think, oh, a story is about having interesting twists and specifics. Great locations, great actions. Yeah, those things are good, but how you do them is what makes it important. The gameplay, I mean, it's also probably some of the best in this series. That isn't to say it's not basic. It is basic. The Mafia games have been fairly basic in terms of gameplay. That being said, it's far better than something like Mind's Eye. I mean, we've been reminded, thanks to Mind's Eye, of how bad it can be. So even when something simple works well and is satisfying, it's worth noting. It is a big improvement over what we got in Mafia Definitive Edition. The enemies in this game are a lot more aggressive. The arenas where you engage them, they're more open. It lets you do more interesting things like flank them, sneak up on guys for melee kills. Enemies can lose track of you in a fight too. There's nothing super new here. Like, I'm not going to put this up here to the same standards of like the best third-person shooters out there. And if you've played basically any modern third-person shooter, you know what to expect. But the game takes a few cues from Last of Us by making guns sway like crazy when you aim them, which forces you to get close to get a good shot off. It's possible to just hole in a corner and take pot shots at enemies, but they really try to flush you out with grenades and constant rush attempts, so you actually have to move around if you want to succeed during a shootout. Keep in mind, I did play it on hard, and I've come to believe this is probably the best way to play Mafia: The Old Country. Hard isn't punishingly difficult in the way that Mafia Definitive Edition was, but it does force you to engage with the game mechanics in a way that normal just doesn't. I did find myself kind of bored on normal and had to bump it up. Once you bump it up, though, you have stuff that you have to engage with. There's a fair amount of mechanics to do. Nothing crazy, but you actually have to heal yourself once in a while. Taking away the aim assist makes it a lot harder to line up easy shots, so you have to either aim carefully or get point blank to take enemies out. The emphasis on movement makes for a much more interesting and dynamic average encounter compared to older games in this series. It's not like amazing, but it's good. When you're not fighting or riding, you're sneaking, and once again, not gonna win any awards, but it is the best in the series. One thing I really appreciate is how these missions are more open. They give you different paths to go down, which sometimes contain optional rewards like chests that could be opened using your knife or safes that need codes. There's a reason to explore as well, because there's actual currency in this game which can be spent to unlock weapons, horses, cars, upgrades for your rosary, which can be equipped with charms that give you some passive buffs, which once again feel a lot more important when you're playing on hard. The sneaking's generally pretty easy. The game's pretty forgiving with the detection, but for a game like this, I will take it. The focus here is progressing the story, and even if there are a few annoying forced stealth moments, which maybe shouldn't be a thing in a game in 2025, they're at least not frustrating. They're not necessary either, but at least they're not frustrating. Something that really does help, too, is just how great this game friggin' looks. They went all out with the cutscenes this time around. The characters are convincingly animated. The acting is strong across the board. There's a few minor characters that stand out with maybe not the best Italian accents, but not many. Visually, the game's quite striking most of the time and runs surprisingly well, too. I played Mafia: The Old Country on PC with maxed out settings, and outside of a little bit of slowdown early on in the game, it ran like a friggin' dream for me. I am running a nice computer nowadays, to be fair, but I've noticed that doesn't generally mean a lot anymore. Like, they really release some unoptimized shit nowadays. This, thankfully, isn't that, though. This is a well-made piece of software. The only stuff I've really seen, like maybe I feel like I've seen or maybe a couple of random graphics bugs an awkward animation, that type of thing. But this game has been mostly free of stuttering or instability. I had one crash to desktop, which that's not ideal, but the load time's pretty good. Generous checkpoints as well. I really didn't lose any progress. Nothing meaningful anyway. I was not frustrated with it. Now, if it had happened a couple more times, I would have been frustrated with it, but I think it's pretty good. Mafia: The Old Country is an old-fashioned, safe bet for Hangar 13, and while some might see it as unambitious or even basic by modern standards, I would like to call this a sort of classic type game. Like, it's obviously a gamey game. I like me some gamey games. I like the kind of experience that we used to get on like PS3 and Xbox 360 and earlier. I'm not saying that's superior automatically, but there are instances where I don't really want a lot more because it works. And here, it works. This is the sort of experience I've come to expect from the Mafia games. Perhaps the most refined version of the formula with the best mechanics, best graphics, etc., etc. It's a well-told story that's not going to wow anybody with his creative ambitions, but it's engaging, has some emotional depth, and I'd even go as far to call it soulful, which is not something I think I've ever said on this channel. I mean, it's not going to give you meaning in life. I would hope that you're doing other things for that. But if you're playing this game, you're here for the story. The other parts of the game are solid, but there's nothing shocking or new here. If you've played a lot of open world games or third-person shooters, you're not going to be surprised or even all that impressed. But it's functional, it's fun, there's some good set pieces, some great spectacle. It feels satisfying, it feels right, and that's what I want in a Mafia game. That's all I can ask for, really. That and a pretty big discount. This game isn't being sold for full price, or at least what passes for full price. It's $50, which, I mean, if it were 15 years ago, I would have said that's a full price game. But also $50 15 years ago is worth like $75 now, so It's nice to have the $20 off the top, though. Knowing they're not smacking you with a $70 or $80 price tag makes the type of game this is feel right. It just feels right. Like it's satisfying as a purchase, as a game, etc. I don't need my brains blown every single time I turn on a game. Sometimes I want to get into something, and I can here. My only suggestion, if you do buy it, play it on hard. It feels like the intended way to play the game. It's a more engaging experience. I feel it's a better experience. So that's Mafia: The Old Country. If you go in expecting an upgraded and improved definitive edition in a totally new setting that feels unique and has a brilliantly executed story with some characters that you're going to care about, you will be happy with this game. If you go in expecting GTA 6, you're going to be disappointed, period. But not everything has to be GTA 6. What do you think? Leave us a comment, let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter and book me on Cameo at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.